How hotter than before. My name is Freddy Ndimuli. Good morning.
Most definitely, and I hope that you had an amazing night and that you're about to have a better day, because right here we kickstart the day we know how. Now, from around 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. we'll be discussing the aftermath of the protests that have been there, the anti-government protests. But this morning we take a look at the human rights, and we ask you, do you understand your human rights? We'll be getting into that later on. My name is Stanley Nyurungita.
Well, good morning. I trust you're having a good one, and welcome to Morning Cafe. We do have a great show lined up for you, so do keep us company for the next 4 hours. Okay, my name is Flora Limuki.
Yes, to our top story now. President William Ruto now says he's open to holding one-on-one talks with opposition chief Raila Odinga. In a statement on Twitter, Ruto extended an olive branch to the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Alliance frontman. Ruto's move comes hours after Raila claimed that the head of state had frustrated efforts to mediate a political truce. Among those who had offered to mediate is Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu, who Raila claims was kept waiting for hours, 4 days rather, after traveling to Nairobi 2 weeks ago to negotiate a ceasefire. President Ruto, meanwhile, jetted off to Tanzania yesterday to attend what he said was a human capital meeting. And that story brings us to our question this morning. Do you support efforts to have our top political leaders hold dialogue? Do you support efforts to have our top political leaders hold dialogue? You can share your feedback at TV47 News on X, previously Twitter. You can also send a text to 22047. You can also give us your feedback on TV47 Kenya on Facebook, TV47 News on Twitter X, 22047 short code, and on Facebook, TV47 Kenya. Yes, and I think just before we get our diary, we go through the front pages of the dailies this morning. What do you have there, Stanley?
On the Daily Nation, it is politics protests called off today to allow for vigils for victims, searching for a deal. The two political leaders looking side by side. The genesis, a dispute over the outcome of the 2022 elections, led to the protests, with the opposition Azimio la Umoja coalition putting out a list of demands to the government to lower the cost of living, to halt the unilateral reconstitution of IEBC, to respect multi-party democracy, and to audit IEBC servers with a view to enhancing electoral justice in the country. Azimio now says the protests are on the high cost of living. This morning, Daily Nation takes us back to when all this began. If you remember last year, time like this, it was heated, across the country, trying to see each of these, political leaders were literally everywhere, by the way. You'd wake up in the morning and you hear one of them is maybe in Marsabit, and at the end of the day, they've traveled about 5 counties, each calling for the supporters to, vote for them. Right now, they're still at loggerheads, matters promises. So it is quite interesting. They put a date there, July 11th, date Tanzanian leader is said to have visited the country to broker truce. The story is on page 4 and 5. They put matters, thinking alike.
Oh yes, I think it is definitely
even the question of the day for us.
Oh yes, it is our top story either way. Flora, the Standard.
The Standard here, the headline, civil servants to brace for July salary delays. Quite a different headline here, considering what is going on in the country right now. It says, effort to upgrade to a new salary payment system for government workers, which seeks to boost the management of payroll, has encountered hitches. And on the other side, we have the mystery of Suluhu botched mediation talks. Tanzania president was in the country on July 12th and 13th for what Azimio leader says were talks to end demonstrations in the country. but that her efforts were futile after she was snapped by government. However, officials say she came for holiday, and remember, President William Ruto is currently on a tour to our neighboring country, Tanzania, and here report fingers, teachers, mothers over beatings. And still on the Standard, Raila, Kenyans united by cost of living. That story is on page 6 of the Standard. And also Ruto targets big taxpayers in IMF probe. That is what we have on the Standard top page.
Okay, and on People Daily, the top page, a similar story. Ruto to Raila, I am ready for key talks. In a surprise move, President reaches out to the Azimio leader for talks, following pressure from Kenyans and the international community a day after the opposition chief called off demonstrations. And the tweet that the president sent, my friend Raila Odinga, I'm off to Tanzania for to harmonize the expansion of employment opportunities in our continent. I am back tomorrow evening. And as you have always known, I'm available to meet one-on-one with you anytime at your convenience, and he signs off WSR.
I remember yesterday, even on Twitter, it was wild, people saying by the end of today, or by the end of before President William Ruto is back, Rigathi Gachagua will have, took a ticket from Italy where he is and, come back just to see how everything will be playing along. And interesting how even on okay.
Just before we leave the People Daily,
okay.
Because the front page highlights another story that's key. This happened yesterday. President pardons top researcher from prison. Former Kemri boss David Koech was serving jail sentence for fraud. Yesterday he was released, and I've seen on X or Twitter, if we may call it that, for purposes of people understanding.
It's hard to forget.
Is that yeah, it is a top trend. It's one of the top trends. Professor David Koech, who taught immunology and molecular medicine at the University of Nairobi, worked at Kemri, was pardoned yesterday. He, alongside 36 others, had been jailed in September 2021. He had been found guilty in a 19.3 million shilling graft case. And of course, the president exercising his power of mercy. It is a very curious, very interesting kind of authority that only the president holds, and 36 people have benefited from that. David Koech, definitely one of them.
Right.
And we do have some headlines from different other papers, including, let's see what's on Taifa Leo's headline, Nahofia nchi yangu, then a picture of the former premier there and President William Ruto. Makabiliano ahidi kuendeleza maandamano kama njia ya kushinikiza serikali kushusha gharama ya maisha, kupinga sheria ya fedha na kupigia debe mageuzi. Still on Taifa Leo, top page, Ruto ampa in quotes mosho moja. Koech aliyekuwa amehukumiwa kifungo cha miaka 6 asamehewa na rais. Na vile katika gazeti la Taifa Leo, siri ya kuishi hadi ufike miaka 100. Mzee aliyepigana katika vita vya pili vya dunia aeleza namna ya kuishi miaka mingi. Quite interesting.
Do you want to live that long, Flo?
I don't think so. Raila kujenga hoteli ya nusu bilioni Kilifi, still on Taifa Leo, na ufugaji nyuki ndio kiboko cha majangili. And that's on Taifa Leo. On the Star,
I think the Star has a very line from what we're seeing from the rest. It's a blame game. Yeah. Raila, why we believe Ruto on the wrong path? He says president's foreign policy has left Kenya embarrassed on world stage. You remember the issue of foreign policy we were talking about.
Yeah.
What exactly, who exactly are we
shaking hands with?
Shaking hands with, forging an alliance with? Is it the East? Is it the West? Is it a sort of conglomeration of both? So it is very interesting, given the fact that even the Sudanese general was talking about Kenya. And yes, that's the Star. At least that one has given a wide berth to this revelations that the two leaders could have talks, the possibility of talks. That is also our top story.
And also on the Star, this is a whole other issue that quite caused the uproar on Twitter. Prosecutors raise alarm over Shakahola pregnancy fears. Yes, I can see your faces, and that is the same face that I had when I was reading that. I was like, okay, I thought you really had a different kind of
they have
mission.
enough trouble already.
Yeah, it can only get mysterious more in Shakahola.
I mean, okay, for them they're like, what are we losing here? Why not? Why not procreate and all that? Let's cross over to Tanzania, and I can try my tongue on some Swahili here. Hoja zinazobishaniwa, kesi ya bandari zaanikwa. And Samia alia na mgawanyiko. So
which paper is that?
This is this is Mwananchi. This is Mwananchi aukemea kwa mara ya tatu ndani ya miezi miwili. Wachambuzi viongozi wa dini wamtaka shughulikie viashiria vya uvunjifu wa amani. Umoja wa Kitaifa azindua ujenzi wa mnara wa mashujaa mrefu zaidi nchini. They really talk about matters of uvunjifu wa amani. Reminds me that clip when Suluhu was talking about peace.
Yes.
Kwa jirani kunawaka kwetu tupo salama na amani.
It's interesting that Samia Suluhu is actually one person, a name that probably will start talking about more here in Kenya. Yes. You see, she's trying to draw parallels with what's happening in her country. She keeps telling her people to remain united, because I'm looking at Habari Leo, that's another daily from Tanzania,
yeah.
And she's talking about tusigawanyike. A few weeks ago, she was comparing the situation in Tanzania to what's happening in Kenya. Then we get to learn that she's involved in attempts to mediate in the Kenyan situation. Then, curiously, President Ruto is in Tanzania today.
Yes.
And we saw that photo with Raila, Suluhu Hassan with Raila. Today morning, we're seeing a photo between with Suluhu Hassan and President Ruto. Definitely, she's definitely in all our headlines.
It's safe to say Samia is giving Suluhu to Kenya.
Yeah,
Let's hope she'll give us Suluhu. We need Suluhu.
Samia Suluhisha.
We definitely need Suluhu. The fact that you also mentioned Habari Leo and Samia, all that. Let me also, take the viewers what is in this particular papers here. For the Swahili lovers, Samia tusigawanyike, ahimiza amani umoja, atoa maagizo ujenzi wa mnara wa mashujaa. Mpango ataja mambo tatu kuboresha. Mpango is you always think that
you get caught up with that every single day.
So Mpango is someone, just so you know.
No.
Yeah, Mpango is someone. Mpango ataja mambo tatu kuboresha rasilimali watu. There are also other headlines in Habari Leo. Ama kuna
before you leave Mwananchi the front page, something that would be of interest to Kenyans.
Right.
There's I think Uhuru Kenyatta has made it to the front page of that daily.
Okay.
Mambo yamfika kooni Uhuru Kenyatta. Sakata la uhasama kati ya rais mstaafu wa Kenya Uhuru Kenyatta na rais wa sasa William Ruto. It is actually highlighted on the front page with a sticker there, siasa za Kenya.
Kurasa wa 15.
Yes, I think they read Kenyan politics and the issues happening in Kenya like a novel.
I'm curious how the newspaper review in Tanzania, them discussing Uhuru Kenyatta.
Yes,
how
and we are here discussing Suluhu because she appears on the front page of Standard.
Yeah. And back home, Business Daily, we had skipped that headline.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nairobi satellite towns making a fortune for property investors. Cost of an acre in Ngong up 60% to 32 million shillings in 5 years. Westlands gains 11% in race with Upper Hill. Wow. So the cost of land in Nairobi satellite towns has definitely skyrocketed. 60%. Well, acre of land in Ngong is now 32 million shillings. Interesting. That's the front page of Business Daily today.
Before we even start to think about buying lands, they're really starting to shoot up. Also on People Daily, I can see push to relax chicks on large cash deals gets IMF attention. Really seems like IMF is quite on Kenya's radar. And still on the Business Daily, it will seem that fraud and corruption are quickly joining death and taxes as the certainties of our lives. That story is on page 9. Matters Intelligence, that is on the Business Daily. I was taking you through Habari Leo before we get to deeply into this papers that we have here, and we'll start with Daily Nation in a few. So the vidokezo ambavyo vipo katika Habari Leo nitajaribu kuzungumza katika lugha ya Kiswahili kidogo tu. Kidokezo cha kwanza ni kuwa mahakama kuu ya amuru TANESCO ilipwe milioni 205. Serikali yaonya wafanyabiashara bei ya saruji. I don't know even what saruji is, but
Saruji is cement.
Oh, hey.
Cement.
Okay.
Hey, okay.
It's not cement.
I know. I mean, Swahili people really.
They can flex.
And DK mwenye ataka majina ya waajiri wasiopeleka michango katika ukurasa wa 7.
Okay. I think there's a headline we skipped on the front page of the Standard. And this is very interesting. It's a special report which fingers teachers and mothers over beatings. It's on page 8. Report why teachers and mothers lead in physical abuse. Well, I don't know. In this day and age, you may call it abuse. But back in the day, I think it was just the order of the day. You knew that anytime you got home, you had to pay for your sins, whatever sins you had committed that day. I don't know, but we are not in any way condoning any physical violence against anyone. It is a nice read there on page 8 of the Standard. Survey indicates continued physical violence despite caning being outlawed in 2010. It also compares factors such as married and unmarried men and women. That's on the Standard today.
It really looks like it has sparked,
It reminds me of a few weeks or months ago, we had the case of the students who are being beaten in, I think it's in Kisii County.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and when some of these cases happen, they are really extreme. So it really begs for some attention to be taken against these perpetrators of such abuse. And remember, right now, it's a woke generation and people know their rights. So you can just beat someone's kid. Like
I think it's a spotlight on mothers there because previously we've looked at other caregivers, teachers.
Yes.
But when we now talk about mothers actually physically abusing their children, it will definitely cause some debate.
The whole question of where is it frustration? Is it matters? Does it boil down to matters mental health and all that?
I think it is the right time to look at the cartoons before we allow Flora to give us a day's diary. We still yet to know what else is happening today apart from our top stories. So, Stanley?
Most definitely. And for the Standard, you can walk through us, with us rather, on the Standard. If you have it there with us, when you're watching us at home, page 12 of the Standard, and a caricature of an elder man holding the briefcase of CBK, and quotations there, hey, stop, where do you think you're going? You know that I can order your arrest, I order you to come back here. And I think he's talking to the Kenyan shilling,
which is on a free fall.
Where is on a free fall there? Going ding dong, where is
Basically
going?
what I see there is the CBK top boss, whoever that is, I will not say, trying to back at the shilling to stop its free fall against major currencies, especially the US dollar.
Right.
And I was seeing yesterday, I think the US dollar was at 145 to the shilling. I don't know.
It's really plummeting, rather really skyrocketing there. For the Daily Nation, okay, oh yes, I've got it. On the Daily Nation, on page 17, we were talking about her. Here she is, the 3 people that the whole of East Africa is talking about. 3 caricatures, one that looks like Azimio leader Raila Odinga wearing his favorite attire, Wednesday's attire, if you like. He likes to wear this on Wednesdays or whenever he's calling for anti-government protests. And a caricature that looks like President William Ruto holding a red telephone. And Mama Samia Suluhu comfortably sitting just close to the door, looking calm and asking, hello, you called Samia indeed in need of a Suluhu.
Exactly what you're talking about.
That's a good one.
We need some Suluhu from Samia.
And it looks like, the telephone lines are cut.
Yeah.
Who cut them, though?
And the table is broken.
Oh, yes.
Definitely an indication of broken talks.
Yes.
And the caricature that looks like, Raila Odinga is looking away. Maybe he doesn't want to look at everyone in that room.
Yes, definitely. This, I think, the cartoon on the Daily Nation today captures the mood of the country. It's what is also on the top story. All these leaders talking about the possibility of talks, whether or not it will amount to anything. And do stand by for our editorial comment on the same later on the show. But for now, Flora, the day's diary.
Before we actually get to, because I always like to get a piece of your mind on this, your take on which one wins for you?
For me, Daily Nation takes it, and I hope within the next few days we are able to mend that cut within that the wire for connecting to a Suluhu.
Right.
Yes.
I'll go for Standard this morning. We really need this shilling to come back, and really need even the whole dollar, and Kenyan shillings to really go back to where it was back then, away from even matters politics. That's all for the cartoon this particular morning. To the diary now.
Well, and on the diary today, of course, we kickstart with Azimio to conduct vigil in different parts of the country to mourn people who lost their lives in the anti-government protest, including different parts, different hospitals, and later on they will convene for the national anthem and, of course, the lighting of the candles. And away from that, the tussle between Azimio leader Raila Odinga and President William Ruto continues. And away, still on matters protests, human rights groups call on IPOA to take on on police brutality witnessed in protest, even as yesterday the CS Interior released a statement, well, of course, defending the National Police Service and saying that the perpetrators of the protest will be dealt with in a few while after the investigations. And we're also looking at the clergy continues to call for truce between the opposition and the ruling government top leaders. Away from that, PS for internal security, Raymond Omolo, we'll be getting back to that, but SpaceX is officially targets today, July the 26th, for the Falcon Heavy's next liftoff. Remember, the first one was in the year 2018, and it is also the National Aunt and Uncle Day, a day to commemorate and celebrate relatives. Also on our diary today, we have the PS for internal security, Raymond Omolo, to Abondo today to assess security situation in the area. And the story that is making part of a big story, top stories of the day, President Ruto heads to Tanzania as he quite an interesting tweet there he released yesterday night, telling the Azimio leader that is ready to engage in any talks when he comes back. It's something that we are, of course, keeping an eye on. That is what we have on our diary this morning. We keep updating you as we move on.
Yes, thank you so much for that, diary. We will be getting down to business with my panelists this morning to discuss the top stories today. And of course, our top story has to do with this indication that of the possibility of our top political leaders to engage in dialogue. This comes from this stems from that tweet by the president yesterday about the possibility that he could have a one-on-one discussion with the Azimio chief Raila Odinga. The president said this as he jetted off to Tanzania for a human capital meeting. The indication that Tanzania is also special in this discussion, given the fact that Raila Odinga indicated that at least 2 weeks ago, the Tanzanian president was in the country in attempts to mediate in the Kenyan situation. She, however, was not successful in that. Curiously, President Ruto, as he tweeted that, he was jetting off to Tanzania. Whether those two events are connected in any way, I do not know. But as they say in politics, nothing happens by coincidence. So this morning, we'll be having at least 3 people to help us discuss these issues. We're hoping to have Honorable Robert Alai, MCA Kilelesho Ward, Betty Adera, UDA Woman Leader, and Noordin Kagai, Advocate of the High Court, as my panelists this morning. So do stand by for that. You're watching Morning Cafe. Welcome back, and I'm busy here trying to tweet our discussion this morning, so just a moment there. TV47 News. That's our Twitter handle. My Twitter handle is at Freddy Ndimuli. In studio we have Betty Adera, at Adera Betty on Twitter.
The other way around.
Yes, and so the tweet is out. It's called an X nowadays.
Oh.
Yes, the whole social media thing. Elon Musk has done that thing to us. He's now called it X, so we are Xing instead of tweeting.
Tweeting,
yes.
Umefanyiwa ile kitu.
Umefanyiwa ile kitu. Karibu sana to Morning Cafe here at TV47. I'm sure you've attended this show a number of times. It's good to have you, and we're still hoping to have the Honorable Robert Alai and Nuruddin Kagai joining us later, but you're here. Let's continue looking at the headlines. Of course, the big story today has to do with this talk of possible talks. Searching for a deal, it's what's on the front page of the Daily Nation today. The mystery of Suluhu botched mediation talks. You realize that over the last 48 or 72 hours, the discussion has sort of changed from those hardline stances to subtle suggestions that there could be talks of whatever nature. The retired president saying if he's invited to State House, he's willing to go and offer, share advice with the president. The Azimio leader saying that actually there were already efforts to mediate in Kenya, brokered by Samia Suluhu, the Tanzanian president. Then in the evening, the big one, the president himself tweeting that he's now, he has always been open to one-on-one talks with Raila Odinga. And I know many people may dismiss this, but this, they say in politics, nothing happens by coincidence. Don't you think? Yeah,
you're right about that. And first of all, Fred, a pleasure to meet you. And congratulations to TV47 for your recent launch. This is a beautiful, beautiful premise, and I'm happy to be here today. The big news and the big issue, yes, you're right that nothing happens out of mere coincidence in politics, but allow me to put a couple of things into perspective, all right? So first of all, His Excellency, the President, flew to Tanzania. Why? Because there's an African Heads of States Summit on human capital development, and the theme for this particular meeting concerns accelerating Africa's economic growth, and in particular boosting, the youth productivity by improving their knowledge and their skills. And that is something that's very key to us as a country in Kenya, because our youth question is one that we keep talking about, and we need to keep talking about so that at the end of the day, we figure out how to ensure that our youth's capacity is built into productivity, and that they can begin to earn a living and an income for their own. So putting that into context, His Excellency President Ruto traveled to
Tanzania for any discussion.
For any other discussion. He's there among his peers and colleagues, other heads of state, for this human capital development. But anyhow, having said that, for me, here is the thing. And also coming from the UDA party, one, the president has always been open to dialogue. As long as those dialogues are constructive and the agenda is clear, and the mission and processes are clear. And we have always had him on media and also on his own State House pages and his own page saying that, look, he is open to having conversation about how to even create an official opposition, because he's also telling Kenyans that I'm not above board. I want a structured way to be held to account as a head of state. That is one. Secondly, and lastly, allow me to conclude by saying this. He initiated the bipartisan talks. What is that? It doesn't mean that the president himself must talk, but he can talk through emissaries. So there was that expanded space for all sides concerned to come, around a table and have a conversation along whatever the issues that are, eating us as a country, and particularly mainly like the IBC question, cost of living, all these things. Like, hey, bring your team, I bring my team, let's talk. And in the meantime, I am agreeing to pause a couple of processes to give this dialogue, a chance. And we've seen him, even unofficially, meeting on a couple of occasions with the leader, with the former premier, and the relationship appears cordial.
Are you saying from that tweet we should not read too much into the tweet? It was just a simple tweet, the president saying, I've always been ready for talks.
I've always been ready for talks. And the other side is alleging that His Excellency President Samia of Tanzania came and was snubbed, but I'm heading right there. What do you think that means?
Okay. Thank you, Betty, for that, for opening up this discussion that will definitely continue. And allow me now to introduce my other panelist this morning, Nurdin Kagai, Advocate of the High Court. Karibu sana. Good morning.
Good morning.
You found us right in the middle of this big discussion today about the possibility of talks between our top political leadership. And of course, I had set the background on the fact that over the last 72 hours, there's been suggestions here and there, some veiled, about the possibility of talks between the three leaders, and I'm talking about President William Ruto, his predecessor, the retired President Uhuru Kenyatta, and the Azimio leader, Raila Odinga. The suggestion by the president on that tweet that he has always been, and Betty says that he has always been willing to hold one-on-one talks. But probably I'm reading a bit too much into the tweet. But it is a coincidence that earlier in the day, Azimio leader Raila Odinga said or revealed that there had been attempts a week or two ago for a mediated roundtable, mediation brokered by Samia Suluhu, the Tanzanian president. And a day before that, during that interview with the media, the retired president said that if at all is invited to State House, he's always willing and ready to offer advice. Now, Betty here suggests or says that we are reading too much into the president's tweet. Do you agree?
You see, the truth of the matter is that all three of them have to talk one way or another. One day they'll have to talk because the country has to move on. And the talks, the most important thing about the talks is what are they talking about? Because if they go and meet up and talk about personal interests, then that doesn't help the common man. Now, but if they're talking about issues about things that actually affect the Kenyan people, be it the cost of living, if they have, let's say for example, Raila Odinga has a different way of how approaching how to lower the cost of living, that would help the president, for example. If they want to talk about the issues in the Finance Act that are in court actually, that will help. It matters repealing certain things that they feel are kind of punitive to the people. Now, but if they go there and start talking about, because you see, in as much as we know they're going to talk about issues dealing with us, there's the other elephant in the room, which is IEBC. And we have to be honest with one another because being politicians, they always plan ahead. And one of the issues among the bipartisan talks was restructuring of IEBC because they feel that the law as it is, which they passed before the elections, the president has an upper hand and he might have his way, seeing that parliament and everything is now more or less if we want to be honest, we don't have a parliament because courtesy of tyranny of numbers, they are the behest of the executive, sadly. So they feel that they would want to have a way of how they can be able to part and parcel of restructuring IPC. Now, matters Suluhu, Raila Odinga is a politician, so is Raila, so is Ruto, and he was being cheeky in the fact that he revealed it yesterday because I'm sure he knew the president is going to Tanzania at the end of the day. So I'm sure it will be interesting whatever.
You give some politicians too much credit at times.
No, I'm sure. You see, on a day-to-day they play politics. That's what they do for a living. So I'm sure whenever, if they have met, that is the president and the other president in Tanzania, they'll laugh about it. They'll talk about it on the sidelines. But I don't think there'll be so much about it because he's there to do his function as a president, and he'll come back. Now, matters talks, as I rightfully told you, if he comes back and he says, like we've seen, he's ready for one-on-one. What issues is the Azimio principle going to present? If it is what we have been talking about, be it the cost of living, that is well and good. But if they go about and start talking about personal interest, then it loses the meaning. And I've heard the president say they don't have time for a handshake. And the best thing that the former prime minister has said, hataki mkate nusu, because hiyo imeoza. So we are at a good place feeling that we do not expect an instance where government is shared. So we hope and pray it's things to do with how to uplift the common man.
And that feeling is definitely shared by a lot of people. The skepticism about any possibility of talks, that any such talk will definitely result in a power-sharing deal, and they're just going to share spoils. But because I can see a lot of hesitance by a number of leaders, especially from the Kenya Kwanza side, about the possibility that there could be any kind of talks. But why is this so? Why are people paranoid that if at all there's any kind of dialogue between the top leadership in this country, that it would be negative for a section of the political class?
People know that always there's that place for dialogue. There's a place where honest, consistent, dialogue with clear objectives, can make way into something bigger, into something better. And the president is on record on many, many occasions saying what? Saying that he's actually open to talking as long as the conversation is about the common mwananchi and not about an individual personal interest. I think he has been super, super clear on that. And we have seen a couple of moves that he has made. But let me tell you, Fred, Wakili here is saying that nusu mkate ilioza. These people, even a slice of that bread, what are the half of it? A slice of it. If they can get their hand on it.
That insistence that they want something from them.
They want something. There's always something. I mean, history doesn't lie. We all learn from history. And look at it all the way from the previous successive, elections that come and go. And we have this presidential contest. Okay, it's a contest, it's a competition. And at the end of the day, that seat is one. It's a seat, it's not a bench. Only one person can sit on it with his or her deputy. And just the immediate former regime. We also, the drama and all the issues politically, that came about following the handshake. And suddenly, after the handshake, the issues around cost of living died, a natural death. All right? The issues around electoral injustices that, the other side were decrying, died a natural death. So the question is, this handshake, what was really the content of it? And that has never been made public. Actually, the handshake shocked everybody, including brigades from both sides. One day, boom, a handshake has happened. But the details of it, the content, the conversation, the issues, that were on the table that resulted into this handshake. Because after that, then what did we see? BBI. And we were kept busy, with BBI all the way until, we know how the BBI, ended. And in the meantime, that administration did whatever they could until another election cycle came. And here we are. So we have a new president, in office, a new administration that is still less than a year in office, but it's doing its best given the circumstances of the day and circumstances of the government as they found it. Mm-hmm. Now, one last thing, Fred, allow me to point this out. From the time when the call for maandamano started, there were certain demands. And with each bout of maandamano, the demands kept on changing. One, it was, we do not recognize this president and this administration in the first place. They are not in office legally. Yet, we also, what happened? Whoever voted. Whoever didn't vote still voted in a way, all right? There was a presidential petition. We watched it live on TV until it came to a point where the former handed over the instruments of power to the current, all right? So how do you come again and say, one of your demands, I do not recognize you? And now the same people not recognizing are the ones now saying, my president, if my president calls me, if my president, so it's a bit fuzzy, and they're not clear on what they actually want. So I agree with Wakili saying that if this dialogue, in whatever nature, form, type, size, place, whatever happens, Kenyans need to know what the content of that dialogue is and and the part that Kenyans are actually being called to play upon in that, and how it will benefit the common mwananchi, which is what the president is really out for.
Probably I should have posed this question that I posed to our viewers as well as we began our discussion. and there's a simple yes or no answer. Do you support efforts to have our political leaders hold dialogue? Betty, what would you say? Yes or no?
Of course it's yes, and it's been going.
Okay.
It's been ongoing. Dialogues are actually ongoing, and the president himself is open to even more dialogue. He has said it, as long as it's about the people.
There has to be a rider, yes. And Wakili, that hesitance is real.
Yeah.
You go through Twitter and you see very high parliamentary leadership and other leaders saying we do not need these talks are inconsequential, there's no such talks, there's no basis for talks and all these things. But it could offer, any form of dialogue could offer an opportunity, because even to the president, he had indicated that even as he was campaigning for the presidency, that he would hold talks with Raila Odinga. In as far as his position as the opposition leader is concerned. Definitely, even the president, there are things that he would want to talk to Raila about. He would want to talk to his predecessor about. This hesitance and hardline stances by some of the leadership, especially in Kenya Kwanza, could jeopardize any possibility of discussions. Don't you think that it's high time someone reined them in and told them, okay, hey, hold your horses. Give this a chance. Even the president might actually benefit from it.
You see, the problem is some careers have been built on insulting Raila and insulting Uhuru. Now, if a scenario occurs where the president is at ease with his predecessor and former prime minister, some careers will be doomed. And those are those members of parliament who, they wake up, they talk about Uhuru, they sleep with Raila's name. So in a scenario where there's tranquility, there's peace, and the three leaders are okay with one another, Raila is doing his work as an opposition leader, Uhuru is doing his work as a predecessor, and being sent wherever as an emissary by the current president, and the president is governing the country. It brings about some who now, they lose content, and that is a problem. But at the end of the day, you see, the president is the father of the nation. And we are getting to a realization where people are coming to accept that there is a president. Because we've had issues, people are saying, oh, he scored with an arm instead of a leg. Now that is what under the bridge, because we have to move on as a country. He has to govern. He has a manifesto that needs to be implemented. Now you have the other side that needs to play its role. And then you have the predecessor who now is settling in as a private citizen, who from time to time, as per the law, he can advise the president only when required, or rather when needed. So we are getting to a point where everybody is accepting the president, and now we have to move on. That is the best part, because from there, we get to judge his work. Because in 5 years' time, we'll be able to know, you pick his manifesto, and you tick whatever he promised, and you say whether it was done or not. So that we move away from this issue of always politicking, because it's like we are back to politics all over again. I have a friend who visited me some times back, and he asked me, but bro, let me ask you, you guys went for elections the other day? I was like, yes. Like, so what is this campaign about? I told him the sad reality in this country is that we finish elections to start campaigns. So the president is already campaigning for 2027, and he's on record saying Raila Odinga will not have even agents. And Azimio has to stay relevant, the sad reality. So whatever they see, cost of living, they'll pick it and they'll use it anywhere. And that is, you see, the current president did the same thing when he was campaigning in the 4 years that he was with Uhuru after the handshake. So it's more or less a lot of politics, but now we need more of the work being done. So we judge what this government has been able to do in 5 years. So the talks are necessary, and we need a situation where leaders talk to one another as opposed to at each other. So this issue of fights and arguing doesn't solve our issues, because they might have good ideas, but the fact that they're fighting, those ideas may never reach the table. So we have a scenario where there are those that are called hardliners in both camps. It's not just in Kenya Kwanza, because you find even in Azimio, some wouldn't want a scenario where the former Prime Minister talks to Ruto, because they believe in him talking to him, they'll have to cease fire. And some are usually using that time to make names. And you see the government is giving them the fodder, because when you start making some arrests to certain members of parliament, they like that because you're building careers. Okay, a good example is during Uhuru's time. The issue with Joho, it built him, you get. So these issues, they are both camps. There are those who gain by the fact that these two are loggerheads. But when things simmer down, believe you me, most of them become irrelevant. And their work will have to speak for what they have.
And Wakili, it does really make sense that in this scheme of things, if at all we were to look at, as he paints a picture of the different roles that the three leaders should play, one as a president, the other one as an opposition leader, the other one as a retired president settling in as a senior citizen, probably there are people who do not see that as beneficial to their politics. And therefore, some of the extremist hardliners that we hear today. And probably it is time to have them contained in some way to allow for this discussion to continue.
When you wake up in the morning as an election loser, and you have exhausted all options available to you constitutionally, legally, and also on humanitarian grounds, and still the decision of the people of Kenya, the will of the people of Kenya is upheld. And then you wake up and say that overnight, now I do not recognize this administration. I do not recognize this one. I do not recognize this one. What are you doing? What do you think the message, what is the message do you think you're sending to the supporters of this side who also actually voted for the person? All right? So right there's a problem. So this side feels that, hiya, we were in office given mandate by majority of Kenyans, not all Kenyans, majority of Kenyans. So there's a problem right there. And of course, on this other side also, the minute you start saying that, you're planting seeds in people's heads that, oh, yet again. Oh, kumbe kuliibiwa, yet again, and so on. Now, when you come up and then you're talking about issues of cost of living, a very legitimate conversation. Actually, cost of living is a global conversation. It's not only a Kenyan conversation. But you bring it in such a way as to pit this one against this one, and you're actually convincing your people that it is because of this person that this issue is actually happening. Whereas in reality, and as a leader of this country, of this continent, you know very well the dynamics around issues of cost of living, all right? So it goes back to the question around, then what do they want? What do they want? There are legal means through which they can raise these issues, including picketing, which is also a legal constitutional right. That also goes with responsibilities. It doesn't mean that if I'm aggrieved, I go out and destroy your property. You see my point? Yeah. But going back to the options that they have, the instruments that they have at hand, and a great one is the parliament, both houses. Unlike Wakili, who says that we don't have a parliament, we do. Every individual sitting there, elected, nominated, is there representing a constituency given by their people or by their political parties.
And even misrepresentation is still representation to some extent.
That's actually right. So if you take these conversations of things, for example, a bill, there is nowhere you're going to talk about a bill except in that house.
But
there's
Betty,
nowhere until that house.
Are you suggesting that any form of dialogue is actually borders on, is actually illegal?
No, that's what I'm saying.
Not governed by the
that's what I'm saying. I'm just expanding options that all parties can explore. And in particular, the aggrieved party. They have a ton of options that they can explore. Including dialogue, to make their point without necessarily worsening a situation that is already bad, without causing us to lose as a nation, to lose lives, to lose property, for people in certain areas to start living in fear, for investors to be frightened to come to Kenya because of the perceived, political instability, which is actually not there.
It's the issue of the hardliners on both sides, and you mentioned the fact that some political careers are made by holding hardline stances, but it comes at a cost. Most of these hardliners, they may hold senior positions in government or in parliamentary leadership, but they do not carry the burden of the state, of the country on their shoulders. It is up to the president at the end of the day. He's the one who bears the greatest responsibility, whether people are complaining about the cost of living, high taxation. Most of this other leaders who speak so loudly on public forums do not really bear the responsibility. They'll go home and not think about it. But the president still has to wake up with all our problems.
Yes, you see, because the law says he's a symbol of national unity. That's why when you get sworn in as a president, it's the President of the Republic of Kenya, not of Kiambu, Nairobi, Uasin Gishu, or Kisumu. So every part of the country sees you as their president, and every part of the country expects service delivery. And you cannot do that in a situation where the country is polarized in courtesy of, be it politics or be it acts of people doing whatever they are doing under demonstrations. And so, he has to rise to the occasion and say, I have a plan to implement, and you can't do that with whatever we are seeing right now. Let us be honest, and that is why Uhuru says he did whatever he did by having a handshake with Raila. It comes to a point where you have to marshal your troops, or rather talk to them, those who feel, like I told you, they feel like endangered species. Some of them have this fear that when these two talk, I might be replaced. So it's for you to assure them that all is well. But you see, the sad reality is that the history that is there.
And some of them may need to be replaced.
Exactly. And the history that is there, there have always been those who have been sacrificed. In any time there have been talks around, we just check the handshake that happened. There are those who felt that they were in government, but they felt that they were at the periphery.
Well,
sadly.
You've just made it very hard for many people, because you're saying any form of dialogue will come with some pain.
It has
to
to
extent.
It will, it's some political pain.
Yes.
Some political, because for the Kenya, for the Kenyans at the end of the day, if those dialogues end up with solutions for easing the cost of living, for us we'll enjoy.
There'll be winners and losers.
But political casualties, now you see, we can't control that.
It is inevitable.
Yes.
Thank you, Akile, for that. You're watching Morning Cafe right here at TV47. Remember our big question today: do you support efforts to have our top leaders hold dialogue? It is a top story we're following throughout this morning, and it is our main discussion as well. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue with this. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Cafe at TV47. And to our top story this morning, President William Ruto now says he's open to holding one-on-one talks with the opposition chief Raila Odinga. In a statement on Twitter, Ruto extended an olive branch to the Azimio La Umoja One Kenya Alliance frontman. Ruto's move comes hours after Raila claimed that the head of state had frustrated recent efforts to mediate a political truce. Now, among those who have offered to mediate is Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu, who Raila claims was kept waiting for days after traveling to Nairobi a fortnight ago to negotiate a ceasefire. President Ruto, meanwhile, jetted off to Tanzania yesterday to attend what he said was a human capital meeting. And our question this morning, we ask, do you support efforts to have our top political leaders hold dialogue? You can share your views at TV47 News on Twitter or X, if you like it. Text us on 22047. You can also give your feedback on Facebook. TV47 Kenya is our page. I'm still in studio with my panelists, Betty Adera, UDA woman leader, and Nurdin Kagai, advocate of the High Court. We've talked a lot about the issues of talks. I want us to just briefly look at other big headlines before we come to this discussion. It is our main discussion and we'll continue with it. Civil servants to brace for July salary delays is a big headline there, but the bigger headline is what is happening today. Initially, Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition had indicated that today would be a continuation of the government protests. Change that, whether it's purely coincidental or has to do with a larger game plan that we are talking about, we still do not know. But we expect that Azimio supporters will be holding solidarity parades and vigils across the country in memory of victims who lost their lives during the protests in recent weeks and later converge for to sing the national anthem. But be it as it may, this is definitely another form of a protest. Do you expect that there will be anything different today, Betty?
For me, excuse me. For me, what's exciting is that truth be told, there are people who have lost their lives as a result. There are people who are in various hospitals because of injuries. There are people living in fear in certain parts of this country because they are perceived as the opposition, because they side with the government. There are people who have lost income when their buildings and shops and supermarkets and kiosks, were raided. There are police officers also, who have gotten hurt. And I read there's also a couple of lives lost and properties and vehicles burnt. There's a chief whose house and home of his childhood was touched. There are UDA offices that have been burnt in certain places, in this particular country. So for me, as the vigil is going on, of course, in commemoration of the departed souls, and may their souls, rest in peace, it is my expectation that side looks at the bigger picture and talks about what really is happening in Kenya and hold themselves also to account. Right to picketing also comes with responsibility, because you're upset and angry that unga is I don't know what price, does not give you the right to destroy public and private property, does not give you the right to become a thief, really, and mug people and beat people and get hurt, in the process. I would also expect them to consider their own supporters, whom they are the ones who sent to the road and are in hospitals, for them to figure out how they're going to support, those families, clear those bills, because most of these people who are actually, in hospitals were the main, breadwinners. I know of a couple of cases where an MCA rallied people, and then in the process, people got hurt in the stampede, all right? And now the MCA, has vanished and left the people there. So this should also be a wake-up call. So for me, it would be my expectation that actually they also consider the cost, of maandamano. You have the right to say what you're not happy about. We get it, and we agree. But there are other ways to also show your dissatisfaction with the government, with the president, with whoever it is you want, without worsening the situation. Because if cost of living is high and that is your issue, and your action is scaring away investors, your action is making, young people who are employed in a supermarket, to lose their jobs because you went and burnt it or looted it, then what exactly are we saying?
Yes. Wakili, there's a lot that can be said about police action, for example, human rights violations, use of excessive and brutal force against protesters, vis-a-vis even understanding of the law by the protesters themselves. The right to assemble, picket, and even present petitions is guaranteed by the Constitution, but there's also the requirement that such protests or such actions should be peaceable and unarmed. What do you say to that?
You see, first and foremost, we have to get to understanding what turns our peaceful demonstrations into acts of violence, leading to things like casualties, arrests, and destruction of property. Once we understand that, then we'll be able to solve certain issues. Because number one, you see, most of the time when you want to have a protest, all you need to do is notify the police. But now there is something that is cropping up that seems that more or less like you need to get permission. And you see, there's nothing like permission. It's just notifications that they can be able to prepare as well. 3 days in advance, they know which route you're going to use, so that they can actually offer security. That is the reason for any protest, for notifying the police. But now it seems like, you see, when you say you've outlawed demonstrations, that means you have suspended the Constitution, which in itself now becomes now an illegality. That is one of the problems. So whenever they intend to have a demonstrations, Azimio, sometimes, yes, they have notified the police late, which is true. We've seen them notified a night too, or via Twitter or whatever. Sometimes they've done it earlier. And the battle lines are drawn once we see the police say that there are no demonstrations on a certain day and we will not allow it. So that leads them into, those protesters or supporters, when they leave their homes, they know tomorrow we're up for a contest. And for this, sadly, there's this notion that for demonstration to be successful, there has to be tear gas. So they'll look for a way of getting that tear gas so that it shows it is successful. That is sad reality. Now we have to understand that courtesy of being in Kenya for all this time and not under a rock, we've been having 3 types of demonstrations. We have those that are Azimio demonstrations, and thanks to Sonko, some few years back, we came to understand that they are also government-sponsored protests. And then now we have those who take advantage of the fact that they are demonstrations. Now we have the thieves and everyone else who is out there to take advantage of the situation. So we have to realize that, or rather we have to understand, what is this that makes these people get violent? There are some days that they have been led to go to Jacaranda to have their rally. And this is the question I usually ask. If they are said, for example, Azimio are going to Jacaranda today to have a rally or something, what's the worst that could happen if you just let them go have that rally? Talk their horse's voice the whole day. Once they're done, they have to go home at the end of the day. But you see, the problem starts when the police barricade their neighborhoods, and then they are told they can't leave. So it turns into a contest where now there are stones, there are live bullets being used, where there are issues of people torch properties, there are issues of theft, there are issues where some get arrested, some get maimed, some officers get injured, as we have seen. And then now it brings you the issue of police brutality, because at what point does a police officer start using live ammunition? What happened to rubber bullets? Those are the questions being asked, because before you get to that, there have to be some measures that have been taken. Yes, we cannot also just say that, you see, policemen are made of steel, so that they should take the stones and get injured and nobody cares about them. No, but we have to understand, because right now we have the figures for the police who have been injured and those who are suffering. But we also need to have a clear data for those who have died, because currently the number that is there is suppressed. And I speak knowing that the fact we've had an AGM as LSK, and there are numbers that we need to know, courtesy of those who have been injured and those who have died. But the sad reality, or rather what pains me, is that how many lives have to be lost for leaders to talk? Because every other time we have these protests, people die. And the sad reality is that, or rather the most unique thing is that this time around is the first time those who die or get injured have been remembered today. Okay. Because those who got injured the years back have not been remembered. But today we get to understand that we are celebrating those who are hurt, and we are going to comfort them. But the sad thing that is, must people get hurt so that leaders talk? When do leaders draw a line and realize that, you know what, there's that saying by Saitoti, it comes to a time where the nation is bigger than everybody else. Does that ever linger in their heads? Because now, those who have died, they have lost, the people who have lost husbands, be it mothers or brothers, those are people who are breadwinners in their homes. What happens to their households? Okay. When leaders decide to wake up tomorrow morning and they're okay, what happens to those who lost their lives? Because we just can't keep saying, put it under the rug and we move on. So a permanent solution has to be found so that we actually have a situation where, in as much as we're advocating for our rights, let people not be used as pawns, so that leaders can actually have a show of big man syndrome. Because you have to realize that, be it both in government and those in the opposition, both have used the protest in one way or another to send messages to each other.
And we'll talk about the legal understanding of the provisions to assemble and to picket. But Betty, the issue of police brutality is one that has been discussed for quite a while. But I'm looking at a statement here by the Interior CS, Kithure Kindiki, issued yesterday, basically denying these accusations. And he says claims that the National Police Service officers and other law enforcement personnel are engaged in extrajudicial executions and excessive use of force against the public are malicious, false, and intended to distort public opinion regarding the recent orgy of violence. Now, this back and forth between the government, did police do this? No, they've not. Surely there are structures to actually investigate and check if at all there were excesses on the part of the police. As you acknowledged, rightfully so, there are people who died. There are people who are injured. There is property that was destroyed and all these things. Isn't it a bit too early to actually say conclusively that the police were not involved?
I don't think that has been the case. The issue here is there are structures and systems and institutions that are constitutionally, set in this country to handle such. So for me, the question would be, what is the role of IPOA in this? And I want to believe that already they are at work, because that is their mandate, to use all means within their power to ensure that all these allegations are actually investigated, and if anybody really is found culpable, then of course there are laws, to deal with that. But Fred, let's look at the bigger picture here. We are talking about a human rights issue, all right? Who is human? Is police not human? Is the protester not human? Is that Mama Mboga who now cannot open her kiosk or shop or kibanda because of protests to earn her 100, 200 bob per day not human? Is that child who should go to school but now cannot go to school because school is becoming unsafe due to protests? Is that child not human? Protected by the same constitution that we are talking about?
But probably we are trying to underline this, the provision in the constitution about the right to life, that it's sacrosanct, that we cannot compare that to property or to other liberties. We start off with the right to life, the fact that people have actually died.
I agreed with that, and I don't think that is being underscored in any way. People have died, and that is what I started by saying, may their souls rest in peace. This, in my view, unnecessary death, unnecessary loss of, but then not just the life, but livelihoods around the people who these people were depending on, as Wakili has correctly, said it, all right? But coming back to how does all this happen? I think we can't just tackle the end without starting from the beginning and looking at that whole process with a view to actually talking to ourselves and to our fellow Kenyans on how to prevent this. No Kenyan need to lose their life, on the streets in the name of picketing, in the name of doing what is within their right constitutionally. If I'm going to protest, I should not die in that whole process. But let's look at how that happens. All right? Thika Road, for instance, we saw on your own media here. Now, it became a looting spree. There was no sight of a policeman. You cannot blame policemen for that. People were stoning cars, matatus, private cars. People were snatching items of people. Ngong Road here, a mess. Now, the same police we are blaming, really, is the same police also who has a duty. And what is that duty? To protect property, lives, to maintain law and order, and all those things. So when you wake up in your spirit of picketing, and the first thing you have done is kuweka mawe kwa barabara, what do you want the police to do?
But at
because
point,
you see my point?
At what point is a police officer allowed or expected to use live ammunition on anyone? That's the question.
That is why I said there is a whole process to investigate all that, and anybody found culpable, of course, will be met with the law as stipulated within our judicial systems. Yes, people should not die. Bullets should not be used. I think that is pretty much clear. But under what circumstances do those happen? And this is not to justify. Life lost is life lost. It's gone. It's not coming back. It's gone completely. And livelihoods, gone. That is why, for me, where I sit, I keep saying, there are other ways to still make your point without necessarily exposing, our children, our youth, our sons, our daughters, our husbands, our wives, to be vulnerable to attacks and to any forms of violence.
Okay. Wakili, the understanding of Article 37 of the Constitution is something that many people are yet to subject their thoughts and understanding to. On assembly, demonstration, picketing, and petition, it's a very straightforward one-sentence line. Every person has a right, peaceably and unarmed, to assemble, to demonstrate, to picket, and to present petitions to public authorities. Today, for example, the intention is that they will definitely assemble.
Yes.
They will assemble to hold, they're calling it solidarity parades and vigils in memory of the victims who died during the protests. There will definitely be some movement because they're saying they will later assemble to sing the national anthem. It could be seen as a form of demonstration. It could be seen even as a way of picketing, probably. They may decide to present petitions to public authorities. It may not be the mandamano that we've been seeing, but definitely mandamano in some way. Do we expect any sort of police action today?
I hope the only action that will be seen from the police is by just offering the services, which is to guard property and to let them do whatever they are doing. Because you see, in as much as we talk about the fact that police are human beings and et al., we also have to go to a point and understand the training they receive at Kiganjo. We were disingenuous by changing the term force to service, and we thought we had done all the reforms we needed in the police service. There's one thing we've never done. We have never decolonized the police service. You see, the instances we have seen the past week where they have this protect the crown at all cost, in that it has come to a point where now we have police in civilian clothes walking around, or plain clothes walking around and arresting people. Some who just have placards or walk in the streets and being arrested. It's like you should never critique the government. And that now becomes a problem because you're stifling freedom of expression. So we need to understand, one, the training they receive. Are you trained to come and serve and protect, as there's a song by one Queen Africa from Jamaica who says, tells them about serve and protect and not kill the people? Or are you trained to come and protect the crown? Because when you protect the crown at all costs, it means any dissent is crushed. And that is what we have been seeing the past few days. And we have to move away from that because there's this talk of we are slowly going back to the dark days. You see, we can't go back there. We have our democracy has evolved. And any form or shape of trying to go back there will be met with a constitution, which is, we have one of the most transformative constitutions. So at the end of the day, I believe stems from tolerance. Are they tolerant enough? There is an example I'll give you. One of the protests in Mombasa, one of the first, the first they had. They were walking on the streets. They had their women representative and some few other leaders and the people. And they were telling the police, we have this petition. Ile ofisi is where we are going to hand over this petition. Then they were tear gassed. Now, is that peaceful? Yes, it is. Do you have a petition to an office? Yes, they do. Is that Article 37 they followed? So why tear gas them? You get me? So that's I'm talking about tolerance and protect the crown, which has to change. Because if you are there to protect the crown, you will always be at loggerheads with the people. And you have to understand that there is no single day that will evolve unless, one, the rule of law is followed, number one. Number two, we have issues where those who believe that any dissent has to be crushed. And that is sad, because at the end of the day, if you're a government, accept critique.
Yes.
We have Kenyans who, which is sad, because we talk about members of parliament who are arrested, and we know them by face and by name. We have close to 300 people who were arrested the other day. Nobody knows them. Nobody knows where they are. And I don't see anybody talking about them. I hope they talk about them today in their vigil. Because at the end of the day, we need to know where these people went to. There's a sad video that I saw. There's a young man who was walking around Kencom. He had a hat on. He just had a placard. And he was just saying how things have to go down. And people in plain clothes arrested him. And they went with him in a Subaru. Who knows where the young man is? And those are the issues we need to understand, so that you don't stifle freedom of expression. Because once you do, then whatever you're doing is unconstitutional at the end of the day.
Yes, this understanding of the provisions of the Constitution in as far as picketing, demonstration and assembly, I think the understanding lacks across board, that even the security agencies, most of them do not understand this. Case in point, when that young man, I think I remember seeing that clip, the young man with a placard, and he had written a few wordings on the placard, and he was arrested, and they said this is an illegal protest. So what exactly is an illegal protest? Do the police understand the provisions of the law? Even the demonstrators, their understanding on how to conduct these demonstrations peaceably and unarmed is definitely lacking. Do you think that today, given the arrangement and the indication of the kind of activities we expect, that the police should actually sit this one out or just observe from a distance?
Remember, Fred, that even stones and sticks are weapons. A stone can kill a person. Yes. A stick, can kill a person. Allow me to just read an article here within the same breath of Article 33, the famous Bill of Rights, which is very, very great and progressive, as Wakili is also saying. All right? But in the same breath, the Constitution also provides limitation on this your right, on these bills of rights, actually all of them. And actually Article 33, sub-Article 3, and I quote, "In the exercise of the right to freedom of expression, every person shall respect the right and reputation of others." All right? So often we are louder on the actual right, the freedom of assembly, of speech, of worship and all that, but we are very silent on the responsibility that comes with it. I can pray to whatever God I want, but I cannot sing to that God so loud to a point that my neighbor next door cannot sleep. I'm exercising my right, but I'm infringing on that other person's right. Now, having said that, what for me I think we need to talk about is, what can we learn from the past? In this country, previously, we have seen teachers strike. Like crippling governments before, teachers. Wakiamua wanaenda shuleni na waingii kwa darasa. That's a problem. And we've never seen tear gas. We have seen doctors, nurses, and so on, nationally or even at counties, strike. They're exercising the same right. They're feeling something is not being done right to them. And probably they've raised issues that are not being heard, so their only option is fall back on this right that the Constitution gives them. And we see police officers there, we see placards, we see all these things there, chanting all manner of things, but we don't see tear gas. Why? I believe the same police force, the same police service, also understands this same article, but they also understand it within the confines of their role as police service given by the same Constitution. And we cannot say that the Constitution contradicts itself. It doesn't. Now, the specific maandamanos, these ones, we saw 3, 4, 5 happening. In fact, the CS Interior was saying what? That is your right. You go ahead and do whatever it is. We saw the first one happening, second and third and fourth. But now when it became an opportunity for stealing, when it became an opportunity for violence, an opportunity to cripple other people who are not, part of that maandamano, then it was declared illegal, because then where does this law start and end? You see my point? When now they say you can stay wherever you are, but do not come to the CBD. All right, for all manner of reasons. You've been given a space to gather there and say whatever it is you want and sing and shout and make your point known. And they have done that severally. But now when they start becoming opportunities where now bad elements probably are also in there using that to loot, then you can't let a policeman sit aside and do nothing. Akiona, somebody's shop is being broken into and things being stolen. It will be the same as coming back here saying, oh, the police did nothing.
So do we expect, what kind of police action do you expect today? How do you expect the police to conduct themselves today, given that, as Emio has indicated, that today will be different, that today it is vigils. We're just doing this in memory, but we will assemble and sing the national anthem. Definitely there'll be some movement, some assembly of some sort.
There have been movements, there have been assemblies, and we have seen sometimes the police are just standing there, you know, with all their gear and so on, just watching as people pass by. Some greet them, some like make faces to them, and they're just standing there still because in their judgment at the moment, until they see threat to life or threat to civil, to disobedience or to violence, then they will just stand there and let you do your thing. So for me, what I expect today, probably the police will be there to provide security and stand guard. But if it goes south, then they will have to move into action.
There could be some tear gas.
Yeah.
Well, the indication is that today will be peaceful. Azimio supporters have been asked to conduct vigils and solidarity parades in memory of victims of those who died in the protests in recent weeks. We continue this conversation. Flora will be giving us some of the feedback from our big question today. And today we ask, do you support efforts to have our top political leaders hold dialogue? Do you support efforts to have our top political leaders hold dialogue? Share your feedback on Twitter or X at TV47 News. That's a handle. You can text us 22047. You can also write your feedback on Facebook. Our Facebook page is TV47 Kenya. Let's now take a break. When we come back, we'll start off with the feedback by Flora.
This economy, then yes, let them talk. We cannot be having an handshake after an election. If someone lost, let him serve as an opposition leader. And Marichard Solit says the only dialogue must be on the high cost of living and police brutality on peaceful demonstrators. Quite interesting feedback there. It's all about common citizen, then it is a good move. But if it's about handshake, again, Akaimbali Kabisa, 2022 during handshake, 2018, 2022 during handshake, the worst was experienced, looting spree, hadi wakakunya uja wagonjwa. I don't know what that meant. But that is just some feedback from Facebook. Let's look at what people are saying on Twitter. And on X, yes, I'm told it's X now. I'll take some time before I get used to saying X. I do support because the country is bigger than individuals. And someone else here says, if I may, what is dialogue meant for? Whatever the opposition wants is clearly impossible. Whether supporting or not, the opposition will look for something to say against the government. That's the pure truth. That's just some feedback coming in. Of course, keep interacting with us at TV47 News on Twitter, TV47 Kenya on Facebook. The question of the day is, do you support the top government officials to hold a dialogue? Let me take it back to Freddie now for our discussion of the day.
Thank you so much, Flora, for that. And thank you, our dear viewers, for all your feedback. You can continue sending your feedback to us on the contact details I shared earlier at TV47 News on Twitter or X if you like. You can text us on the short code 22047. You can also find us on Facebook. TV47 Kenya is our page there. We're still in studio with Betty Adera, UDA woman leader, and Nordin Kagai, advocate of the High Court. Let's talk about bipartisan issues. Our top story today is on the possibility of talks. The bipartisan issue was one of the biggest attempts at that, but failed tremendously, miserably, horribly, if we may say. It goes to show the lack of willingness to work together on the part of probably parliamentary leadership. This could be another problem, a hindrance to even these efforts that we're talking about now, that especially parliamentarians, it takes us back to the issue of careers, political careers being made or broken by this. Definitely we're going to encounter those parliamentarians sat together for days. They came out with nothing.
You see, because we need to understand the main reason for those bipartisan talks, or rather what interest they were serving. Because in as much as whatever was shared to us in the public, there are those things that obviously we are not privy to. And I believe that both camps, you see, the ones who have been sent there to represent both camps always make phone calls to their appointing authority in those talks, because at the end of the day, they can't move. And that's why they always have a stalemate. Because they say that in politics, the eye for interest is always constant. What interests that are there haven't been achieved by those political, both leaders who have sent these troops there to have discussions? Because at the end of the day, if their discussions are based on how to work best for Kenyans, that's the easy discussion you can have. Because the government of the day will say we are doing X, and those in the Azimio will say that is wrong, we prefer Y. And so you'll have a compromise at the center. But if it's about restructuring IBC, we ask ourselves in that commission, how many people are you going to give me space for? How many people will you have? If that is the conversation, they'll always have this stalemate. And if there are other conversations that we don't know, because clearly you can see there's a problem, and that is where they never come up with a resolution. Yeah. And now we're being told by one of the co-chairs, he's saying from Kenya Kwanza, that the time for bipartisan talks will lapse because they can't be there forever. And they can only discuss things within the confines of the law. They cannot go and talk about things that are extrajudicial. Yeah. So at the end of the day, what does that tell us? It tells us that these bipartisan talks have failed. That is number one.
It was an exercise in futility.
Exactly, it was.
That's what I hear.
Or rather it was doomed to fail. Yes. Or rather it was a ploy. You see, in politics, there are so many booby traps that are set. One of them, I don't want to be a pessimist, but even, you see the tweet from the president yesterday might be a trap. You never know.
Time wasting is also part of politics.
It's part and parcel of management.
Yet, political problems require political solutions. The formation or recruitment of IEBC commissioners is a very political issue, given the fact that apart from the other duties that the IEBC commissioners or the commission has to play, the main role is to oversee elections, which are very political. And democracy There are those who argue may not necessarily be the perfect way. Majority will have their way. Minorities will only have their say. Probably we need a different intervention altogether when it comes to political problems. And probably when it comes to discussing the IEBC and its formation, we need something outside of the legislature. Because even if you go to vote for it, definitely it's only the majority who will have their way.
So political solutions, as may be, also have to be within the confines of the law, all right? And in this particular case, we saw on your media, on 2 or 3 occasions maybe, it is one side that showed up for the bipartisan talks, which is the government side, but the other side were no-shows, all right? So then meetings kept on being postponed and postponed and postponed. The issue of IEBC is super critical, and the same law provides for the how. How do you reconstitute IEBC? It's clear. It's not even rocket science. It is actually clear. And the president, in his wisdom and duty, followed that due process. But of course, with the noise and distrust and all that from this other side, the president is also a listening president. He said, okay, let me listen. Let me pause them. So can we create, a meeting that is bipartisan? You bring your folks, I bring mine, from both sides who are in parliament, because this is a parliamentary, process. And then just talk about 1, 2, 3, 4. It was very clear what the mandate of that bipartisan committee, dialogue committee, what was about. And actually the process of even nominating the committee to oversee the recruitment now of the other IEBC, commissioners was stopped to give this, dialogue, a chance. Now, Fred, as we sit now, there are wards in this country. There are constituencies in this country that do not have a representative in county assembly, in national assembly, because of passing of the people who are holding those positions. Now, right of that constituent, because now they are not being represented in those crucial houses. And that replacement can only be an IEBC process. Yes. And IEBC as it is now,
we do not have it.
We don't even have it, can do nothing. All right, so actually we're in a very precarious, situation in this country. And if bipartisan talks, have failed, for reasons that we know, I believe, then what choice does the president have? Will he just sit, in State House and do nothing?
Do you think that there's an opportunity in this dialogue that people are talking about all those in
those
subtle ways?
Those are people talking about.
Yes.
Let us wait and hear what the president himself, actually does. And what I know from what he's on record having said, he is open to talking as long as the conversation is about bettering Kenya.
Yes, and of course, the role of Parliament has come into question. The people exercise their right to representation through the elected members, yet there are those who claim that the current Parliament, as it is, has been captured by the executive. We are seeing a general lack of independence in the thinking by most of the members. We're seeing even capture of parties that would have been on the minority side now working with the majority side. It is politics, yes. But the fact that we have a parliament that is quick to attend to the whims of the executive and appears to be a simple rubber stamp to whatever the executive wants, that is a cause for concern as well.
You see, we are back to the tyranny of numbers under the former administration. That was Jubilee A, this is Jubilee B, but in yellow, a sad reality, and as much as they would want to deny it. So at the end of the day, what we are seeing, that's why I said we don't have a parliament when I started this conversation. Because most members of parliament don't even understand the roles they have as members of parliament. If you're a member of parliament, legislates, represents, and oversights. Now, there are those who are in Kenya Kwanza, and they believe, by virtue of being in Kenya Kwanza, they're in government and oversight is on Azimio.
And it also works the same way with some of those who are in Azimio but are already working.
So the sad reality is that they forget, in as much as you campaign for a certain coalition that entered a formed government, you still have an oversight role over the same coalition, since we will have one president at the end of the day. Now, the sad reality is that we have members of parliament who are on record, and this is the majority whip during the finance bill discussions, because I follow the House very well. And he's on record saying that the government never loses. And now, the question that begs is, who is the government fighting? Is it the people? Because if that is the fight, they will never win. We have to be honest with it. So at the end of the day, members of parliament forget their simple roles. And they are always obsessed with one role that is not entirely their role as per the act which they say is under committees, that is CDF. That is why they walked out of the induction process, because CDF was not disbursed. Because for them, without CDF, in 5 years, if you ask most of them, where were you when a certain bill was being discussed in the House? They were never there. And that is why some of the members of Azimio, during voting, were never there, but will come out during the rallies and chest thump and say how this thing must fall. How will it fall if you can't marshal your numbers in parliament? That talks to your level of representation, oversight, and legislation. Now, moving forward, we have members of parliament who also don't understand their roles in this context. They forget that we have 3 arms of government that depend on each other. That is executive, legislature, and judiciary. Now, when you hear a member of parliament say, I have gone to the president to seek for development, I've gone to the government to seek for development, you're an arm of government where appropriations happens in your same house of the budget. So the days of going before the crown to seek favors and to beg for mercy, you know, in South Africa they say they kiss the boer. Those days are long gone, because as a member of parliament, issues of service delivery are a right to your people, because we have moved past that. And that is why we have to have a crash course for these members of parliament and senators, because most of them don't understand the roles they have. So that is why I said they have been captured, because when you look at issues of voting, some don't even understand what they're voting. Some never even appear in the House. And I say this because I watch that House. But on the voting day, it is full. They just come to, and some are even asking, how do we vote? There's a joke around parliament, they ask, how do we vote? There were issues where I've been told that some members of parliament from Azimio were either paid to abscond voting the finance bill, and some were paid to go on holiday. And you see the majority whip once said that he gave them soup, then he came back and after an uproar said he didn't. You see, the sad reality is that we know it's true, because these are the same people under the former House were bribed 10,000 shillings during the sugar scandal in toilets. So you ask yourself, as a Kenyan, if you cannot represent me, and if you cannot look at my best interests, what reason do I have to have a parliament at the end of the day? And that is why you understand some Kenyans who are saying, you know, I'd rather go out there and demonstrate and make noise because I feel that I'm not represented. And the sad reality is that when they vote, someone stands there in a good suit and says, I am a member of parliament for constituency Y, my people and I have sent me to vote yes. Which people? Do members of parliament understand that in as much as a bill is being passed in parliament, you have a duty to do public participation in your constituency? What is so hard, for example, if I'm having a bill that is sponsored by someone in the House, I conduct public participation in my constituency and understand whether this bill suits them or not.
Yes.
And when I go to vote, I'm well informed. But they never do that. For them, it is CDF disbursed? Yes, no. And some others, how is the best way for me to be a sycophant so that certain services I want and favors can be granted? And this is where the president needs to understand he needs 2 tables. A table for wise counsel and a table for purely sycophants, where he goes to sit after having discussed with those who have given him wise counsel. If he needs some praises and some amusement, he can sit on that table. Because you cannot mix the 2 tables. He can enjoy that. Because you cannot mix a table of sycophants and wise counsel. It will never work. Because at the end of the day, you have members of parliament who never appear in that house. But at the end of the day, they are always out here making noise. So you ask yourself, where's the oversight? Where's the legislation?
And representation is an active role. Members of parliament should be aware of this. But we are seeing a trend, and by a trend I don't mean just under this administration. Even the last administration, the fact that members of parliament are now holding the parliamentary group meetings at State House. They get their directions directly from State House. And I'm not just talking about Kenya Kwanza administration. Even the Jubilee administration did the same thing. That in itself undermines the role of parliament, undermines the role of the legislator, that you are not thinking independently, you have to get your directions from the executive, from State House. Don't you think that that is an even bigger problem for political parties like UDA, the one you represent?
So first of all, let us give our elected members the due respect that they should be accorded just by virtue of having successfully secured the mandate of the people in their constituency, whatever that constituency is, to emerge the winner, to represent them in various houses, county level and also at the National Assembly. So that is one. Secondly, you raise the issue of independence of Parliament, all right? And we are seeing almost, if you like, for the first time, members of, say, Azimio supporting motions that have been brought by the Kenya Kwanza aligned, members of Parliament, for example. To me, that is independence. It means that I am looking at this issue. This is the issue first before I wear the kofia of where I am coming from.
But we've seen some of them doing this after visiting State House. It is that connection between State House and these legislators that we are questioning.
But is State House prison? Is State House a place even you can go and visit? Even me, I can go and visit.
It is the kind of influence that the executive is having on the legislature that is now the cause of concern.
Look, where is really political power? Political power sits in Parliament because that is where laws are made, that is where laws are reviewed, they are revised, and so on, and debated. And once a law there has been debated and has been passed, regardless of who brought it, the minute it becomes law, it is law for everybody, all right? And remember, every administration that comes to power on a certain promise. We promised Kenyans this, if we get in, we promised that. Some of those things the president cannot just wake up and do. He has to also follow due process, which he does. How? Through that same house. Mm-hmm. He needs now to manage the budget of the country, just for, as an example. And he cannot do that outside the provisions of a finance bill, for example, all right? So if there were issues that needed to have been fixed in the existing bill, what did he do? That whole process went back to the right house where it was debated. We even saw sections that were not appealing to the members there removed and others retained. And eventually we saw, the voting happening. Now, when you say that there are some MPs who are coming to State House to look for development, to go and develop their areas. Personally, I don't think that's a correct assumption. And incorrect in what way? An MP, what is your jurisdiction? A constituency. Mm-hmm. A constituency must exist in some county in this country. That particular MP has access to funds through the CDF to do whatever it is are the priority of his or her people there based on a process of public participation and so on. There are some things in terms of development that she also promised, his people, that are not within his mandate. Has to be from the governor of that particular county, but there are some services that must come from the national government. There are some roads that is not in the jurisdiction of even the governor or the county government. It has to be a national. So when a leader who's elected and sent by his people that these 5 years, we are giving you this mandate, promised us 1, 2, 3, 4. What is the crime for collaboration in terms of the services that are clearly provided for by the national government? Can I also get a piece of it on behalf of my people? You see? So politics is politics. We can call it whatever it is. But if the Kenya Kwanza, has a grip just based on their numbers and also on their policies and legislative prowess, in government, they are going to have their say because it's about voting, and even voting an MCA is about numbers. Whoever gets the majority of votes gets their way.
Yes, they call it democracy, and they say in democracy, the majority will have their way even as the minority have their say. Lady and gentlemen, we're coming to end of the conversation this morning.
Is it?
Thank you so much for this discussion, but I'll ask you to give your final comments, starting with you, Wakili.
For me, I'll just go back to Parliament, because that's the most important house in this, in this land, because courtesy of Parliament, you can even impeach a president. For me, the issues I believe, and that's why I say Parliament is independent, is because it cannot be independent when members of Parliament from ODM work with government, that is independence, but when there's a member of Parliament from the same Kenya Kwanza, Gathoi wa Mushomba, speaks differently from what those in Kenya Kwanza want, that becomes a problem, and she gets sanctioned. That is not independence. And we have to be honest, when politics is being played, it's politics. We have to be very careful with the issue of tyranny of numbers, because courtesy of that, we saw what happened to certain bills like the security law that was passed in the other house that the court stamped unconstitutional. Executive power has to be checked, has to be oversighted. And I believe there is no single day oversight and development go hand in hand. I don't believe members of Parliament in CDF. I believe we brought about evolution to bring about service delivery, not just about counties. It's about service delivery. And I believe members of Parliament should only play an oversight role purely and remove the issue of development, so that when they campaign next time, they tell you what they're campaigning about and remove things of CDF. Because now they tell us CDF is based for education and security. The IG now has a fund. IG can bring about issues of constructing police stations. So you can take that away from the members of Parliament, because that is what they claim to be doing most of the time with CDF. So we need members of Parliament to do oversight, legislation, and presentation, away from all these other gimmicks that they do, so that they actually understand the roles that they have moving forward, and so that we can move forward as a country, so that the excesses of any arm of government is checked, and checked in the right way. We are not saying the judiciary is perfect. I am in that arm, and I can tell you for free. But every single day we try to have a better way of moving forward, so that we avoid issues of where we are being told the government does not lose. So what happens when a government tries to legislate through Parliament, through the leaders that from the government side? What if they happen to legislate that everybody in Kenya should lose an arm? Does it pass because they have the numbers? So we have to be very careful on the issue of tyranny of numbers, so that we can have any excesses is checked, and we have a country where all arms of government coordinate and work together without having an issue of capture, so that independent minds can also rise to the occasion.
Okay, thank you, Wakili. Betty.
First of all, thank you for having me here today, and once again, a pleasure to meet you. The two big questions today that we had on this studio was about the potential for dialogue between the President and Right Honorable Raila, based on the tweet that came from the President himself. So for me, what I would just say to myself, actually, and to fellow Kenyans who are listening, is that, one, there's always that place where people can come around a table, and calling on the other side to go back to the bipartisan talks if that table is still open. Those great ideas you have, bring them on the table for them to be considered, so that as a country we can move forward, and at the end of 5 years then come back and look back and reflect and say, how did the current government perform after 5 years, not in less than 1 year. Then lastly, cost of living is high. Nobody is refusing that, and it is high in Kenya, it is high everywhere in the world. But violent protest is actually not the way. It is not going to bring cost of living down. So fellow Kenyans, let us shun violent, demonstrations, and go back to constructive dialogue and suggestions on how Kenya can actually move forward. Tutoke kwa barabara, nobody needs to lose their life again. Nobody needs to be injured again in the name of maandamano.
Thank you so much, Betty Adera, UDA woman leader, and Nordin Kagai, advocate of the High Court. Our panelists this morning, thank you so much for such an engaging conversation, and I look forward to hosting you in this panel again. Ladies and gentlemen, you continue watching Morning Cafe. Let's now move to my colleague Flora for more updates.
Well, quite an interesting conversation we've had there. And of course, before I give you an update on the diary of the day, let's sample some 1, 2, 3 feedback from Facebook. Elias Chumba, not at all. This is concerning the question of the day of whether or not the top leaders should have a dialogue.
Not at all. Raila should remain in opposition because that space belongs to him and him alone. He is denying his God-given position. Let him stay there as he gets prepared for his exit in Kenya politics. BC Jason, it's always a yes, and if you don't support that, you're just mean. Everyone's voice in this country should be heard, and that's democracy. Edwin Bet, never. I voted for president. What's, Guka, what's democracy? What's the purpose of voting? You engage with the terrorist for what? That's some of the feedback from Kenyans. On Facebook there, and of course what I'm getting from that is that most Kenyans, yes, want this dialogue to happen, but let the leaders be talking about the issues that are affecting Kenyans, including the high cost of living, but not at for personal interest. Just a quick update on the diary. The Cabinet Secretary for Health and Cabinet, that is Susan Nakumicha, and Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Alfred Mutua, will be before the Senate this morning to answer some questions concerning their dockets. And later on in the National Assembly, the Cabinet Secretary for Water and Irrigation, Alice Wahome, and Florence Bore of Labor and Social Protection to appear before the National Assembly, of course, to answer questions on the accountability concerning their specific dockets. Right now, I pass it to Fred to give us the editorial commentary of the day.
And now to our editorial comment this morning. In a political landscape often rife with division and animosity, it is both encouraging and heartening to see even the subtlest signs of reconciliation among our nation's top leaders. President William Ruto, retired President Uhuru Kenyatta, and opposition chief Raila Odinga have in the last 48 hours or so shown veiled signs of a thaw in relations. We could be wrong about this, but you're definitely not wrong to have a hope for a better future. It is that tweet about the possibility of one-on-one talks, however unlikely, that revelation about recent attempts by a foreign leader at mediation that never materialized, that curious quip about how a predecessor and successor could actually offer advice to each other and gain from each other. There's wisdom and support to be offered. Improbable as it may seem, that is what we're talking about. The recognition of common ground, though often laced with nuances and willingness to engage in constructive dialogue, is a testament to the maturity and statesmanship of these leaders. It is crucial to acknowledge that reaching a consensus is not always straightforward, and progress may be gradual. However, the mere act of acknowledgement and acknowledging the need for reconciliation is a significant step forward in itself. But as I said, we could be wrong. It is also important that we disabuse ourselves of the notion that any reconciliation among Kenyan political leaders will inevitably lead to an agreement on the sharing of power. Reconciliation should not be solely seen as a means to divide the spoils of authority among political elites. Instead, true reconciliation should revolve around finding common ground, fostering understanding, and addressing the